Like darkness in the valley. We can live like Jack and Sally if we want. Sometimes I think our tastes are more complicated than we even realize. Like a lot of times, let's say you find a music album that you love or a book that you love, and then you start the selection process of having to read another one. And you say, I want something that sounds like this. In reality, what you may mean is, I want something that makes me feel the same way that this thing did. So I've talked about this many times on the channel. The Chronicles of Narnia was a very influential series for me, in part because it was the very first fantasy series that I ever read. I think most people my age, it was either common that it was Narnia or probably Harry Potter. But for me, it was Narnia, and I had never really read anything with magic in it before. So when I picked up the Chronicles of Narnia and read those books, it blew my mind to feel magic in a world for the first time, especially because Chronicles of Narnia is a portal fantasy. So it takes place in theory in a place that you could get to from our world. And I fell in love with that as a kid. And the feeling that I got when reading my very first fantasy book ever is one that is hard to recapture as an adult because I read a lot of fantasy now. Probably trying to chase that high. Because the way that fantasy has made me feel, the way that magic in these worlds and stories has made me feel, is something that resonated so hard with me as a kid that I'm constantly looking for something like that again. I mean, I think that's a lot of the ways that our tastes are formed. As much as I love a lot of the modern fantasy that I've been reading, I talk about like the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, I talk about the Cosmere by Brandon Sanderson a lot. And there are so many amazing things about those series, I'm not downplaying them at all. They don't make me feel the way that I felt when I very first read the Chronicles of Narnia. I'm old, I'm cynical, I've seen things before, they have different focuses, you know, nothing evokes that sense of awe and wonder and mystery the way that I felt the very first time I read the Chronicles of Narnia. And one of my favorite, if not my favorite book in the Chronicles of Narnia, because it really depends on the day that you ask me, is a book called The Magician's Nephew. And the thing about The Magician's Nephew is, it is the first experience chronologically in Narnia with discovering Narnia and watching that process. I guess I don't want to spoil The Magician's Nephew. Can you spoil The Magician's Nephew? The book has been out for a very long time, but just in case, because I really do think if you haven't read it, you should go back and read it and hopefully you get some cool feelings from it. But the whimsy and the wonder of reading The Magician's Nephew for the first time is a hard thing to replicate because once you've felt it, it's not an easily repeatable emotion. In December, the channel's patrons voted to read a book called Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. The things I knew about Piranesi by Susanna Clarke before reading it were, you don't need to know anything going into this book. The less you know about it, the better that it is. And to preserve that sanctity of experience, I'm going to do my best to not spoil anything from the book today, except the way that it makes me feel. The way you make me feel. And first off, I have to say that Piranesi starts off with a pull quote from The Magician's Nephew, which in my book, it's a good way to start a book. It's a good way to get me interested right away. And I don't think this book squanders that beginning. This book was able to evoke in me so many of those feelings that I've wanted to feel again for such a long time. The whimsy, the joy of discovery, the mystery, the magic in the, like, not just fantasy magic sense, but the way that it was able to create a sense of awe and curiosity in me was unparalleled by most books that I've read lately. It's not that this book was completely unpredictable. It's not that this book necessarily did something amazing, but the way that it tells its story and the imagination of Susanna Clarke when she wrote this book blew my mind in being able to succeed at something that many other books cannot do. Piranesi is told in the form of a character writing down journal entries, and the entire book is told this way. It's just journal entry after journal entry, but the character is basically brain dumping all of their thoughts, stream of consciousness style, into this diary. And dang, what a joy that it is. I will admit that while I was reading this, because the journal entries are relatively digestible, they're pretty small, and otherwise the book is not broken up except into parts, I did find it extremely easy to read a couple journal entries and then put it down, which is to say this book took me a couple weeks, I think, to get through all the way, which is astounding because it's probably the shortest book that I read all of last year / this year. But I was never slowed in my reading because because it was boring. I really think I just wanted to savor the joy of discovery of what was contained in these pages. A lot of the things that are in the book are things that we've seen before. This is a good mashup of them, and I think that the journal entry telling style was really part of the hook that sort of made it click into place in the wonderful way that it did. And additionally, on top of the storytelling layer, which I think this is a book that you could completely read as a story, it'll be fine. I think there's probably things that I missed on a thematic level that I could really get into there and mine, because it does feel like the type of book where it's trying to say something more than what it's just saying, but like in an intriguing way that makes me want to reread this at some point instead of in a way that I think is dumb or unnecessary. I think the nature of the protagonist in this book, their plight, the way they explain the world, there's a lot of interesting elements that you could dig into and mine and explore. And I do think a lot of them come across to the reader without too much digging into, but it really feels like something where there's a lot of metaphors packed into something, but it's still thoroughly enjoyable as a quick read. If the key ideas that I've mentioned to you sound interesting at all, I would highly recommend you check out this book. It's a book that I didn't see a lot of people talking about on BookTube this year, but the friends that I had who had read this were absolutely in love with it. So thank you so much, Christy and Slag, who pushed heavily on the Discord for us to read this book. I'm so glad we got to it. Once again, my patrons are amazing at picking books that I probably wouldn't have picked up that I absolutely love. So yeah, go out there and check out Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Have you heard of this book before? Did what I say sound interesting to you? If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up on the video. If you'd like to talk about books with me and my friends in a dedicated place and format, there is a Discord link down below that's available for everybody. And if you'd like to be part of these buddy reads or these buddy read selection and process, there's a link down below for that as well as a link for a merch store where I put up some dumb shirts. Thank you everybody for watching this review. I hope your 2021 is going well so far. Remember, don't get too excited, cautiously optimistic. I hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Stop playing, I do it like a king do. If these haters animals, then I'ma have a mink suit. Telling people I should put my name on the wall. I speak the truth, but I guess I should forward language to